There we are. Well, good evening. Lovely to see you. Very, very warm welcome. Thanks so much for coming to St. Mark's tonight. It's so good to see you. Such a lovely evening, isn't it? It's so good to be inside. See the trees outside with all the nice blossom, and lovely to be able to be spending this time together. Very warm welcome as well if you're joining us on live stream tonight. Hope that being with us at home is going to be a blessing and an encouragement as well. I don't have very much to do tonight apart from to introduce and to hand over to the tireless Roger Carswell, who's already recorded, I think, about 20 talks today, is that right? But we're delighted to have you back again tonight, Roger, for the second night of the Hope Mission, and you're going to be hosting and speaking for us. Thanks so much, Roger.
Great. Thanks, Marcus. It's good to be here. Actually, we had a wonderful, messy church here this morning. It was really, really good. And I think that's the highlight of the day so far. But yeah, I've just been recording a few talks. And I must admit, what was it, about 4:30, I texted Marcus to say I'm absolutely shattered. So I fell asleep for an hour. But anyway, we're raring to go to that. And it's really good to have Gareth with us. I'm going to be interviewing him shortly. Just before I do, you may have noticed, when you came in, there is a superb bookstall, and it's in charge of the bookstall tonight is... I know, I was hoping she would say it. Yes, well done, there we are. So you can see she's very, very forceful, and she will persuade you to buy loads and loads of books. Well, apart from 4 exceptions, which books I really like, but they're a little bit more expensive, they're all either £1 or £3 each. But this is not a Tupperware party. You don't have to buy anything. I don't want you to feel, conned us into church to sell us something. And I don't make any profit on any of the books, not even a penny a book. The price I get them for is the price that I try and sell them for. And just to prove it, look, if there was something you wanted and you didn't have the money, just distract Bethany, make her look elsewhere and take it. All right, you have my permission. All right. So 2 books tonight. I wish we'd got more of these, but I've been on the road now for a week and a half, and so these have gone. I've only got 2 left, so it's first come, first served. But it fits in very well with the theme of tonight. It's called "Where is God in a Messed Up World?" It's just £1. It tries to tackle this subject. Why does God allow suffering? Why doesn't He intervene? If He's a God of love, surely He could do something, etc. And in it as well are 5 stories of people who've been through immense suffering, but in the midst of the suffering, they found or proved God to be a very present help in time of trouble. We're focusing a little bit on Aberfan. And of course, as soon as you think of Aberfan, you think of the tragedy there in 1966. But there's a story here. If I tell you the name of the name of the town, eventually, immediately you'll know what it is. There's a story of somebody whose daughter was killed over Lockerbie. She was in the plane when it was blown up. But there's some very other moving stories here. Just £1 for that. And then, oh, wow. Well, this is £3. It's a hardback. The trouble with this book is that the book is £3. You'll probably spend 10 times that on boxes of tissues. So be ready. It's a deeply moving story. As it happens, I know the lady who wrote it, who died just about 3-4 weeks ago. But I know her husband very well, a widower now. And I interviewed him a couple of weeks after his wife died. 30 years ago, their 9-year-old daughter was abducted and murdered. But what a story, and how they go through it, and the victory in it, and lovely sentence from her husband at the end. The murderer was a man called Robert Black, and he says, Robert Black took my daughter's life, but he was not going to take my life. It's a great book. There came a day when I read it. I started about lunchtime, and I've got to say, I did nothing else that day until I'd finished it. It really is a gripping book. There came a day, very moving. Anyway, there at the back, I want to read a few verses from the Bible. They're very, very familiar verses. Some of you will think, oh, Roger, we all know about this, but I hope we'll get some little insights that are different as well. They're found in John's Gospel, chapter 3, verse 16, and I'll go through to verse 21. Years ago on a beach mission, I remember all the boys and girls and the beach missioners, the team, had to learn this by heart, so it's always been very precious to me. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than the light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come into the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. But we'll come to that a little bit later on. But now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Gareth, and shall we give him a very warm welcome? Let's give us some water. Gareth, you've travelled a long way today.
I have, yes. I've travelled across South Wales from the beautiful part of Wales, Pembrokeshire, which is where I live now. So,
right, whereabouts in Pembrokeshire?
I live kind of halfway between St David's and Haverfordwest, so right in the middle of farming country.
Well, there's a gentleman at the back there who got married in Haverfordwest, and I remember going to the wedding and thinking, I can't believe this land continues. I think I got to Swansea and think we must be nearly there now, but no, we weren't. But anyway.
When we moved to Pembrokeshire, I was working in London at the time, and colleagues said, I said I'm moving to Pembrokeshire, and they said, oh, yeah, I've been to Tenby. I said, no, you get to Tenby and it's 45 minutes beyond. So,
well, it's great. Thank you for coming, and we really appreciate that. What do you do for a living?
I run a charity that supports farmers and farming families who are in crisis. It was a little local charity in Pembrokeshire when I took it on 6 years ago, and it's now almost nationwide.
Really?
60 volunteers, and going strong.
Well, farmers are having a tough time, aren't they? I know that.
They're having a really tough time, and it's getting tougher. So,
yeah. Okay, and married, children?
Married, 2 dogs, 4 chickens.
Oh, right, okay. Are they cheaper, more obedient than children?
Well, when we first went to buy chicken food from the farm supply shop, the guy said, first time? I said, yes. He said, the most expensive eggs you'll ever eat.
All right, okay. Now, clearly we've advertised your story as featuring in Aberfan. Is that where you were brought up?
Yeah, born and raised, and lived the first 18 years of my life there.
Okay, and did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I've a sister who's 7 years older than me, and a brother who was 1 year ahead of me in school.
Okay. Is that because you had to keep repeating years and therefore... No, never mind, okay. And I was lost on everybody. Your family, was it a church chapel going family or anything? Or not?
No, not at all. I do remember we went to Sunday school for a few years, but I think it was so that Mum could get us out of the house when cooking Sunday dinner.
Yeah.
As soon as we were like 10, 11 years old, that all fizzled out.
So it didn't make a big impression on you at all?
No.
And you think of Aberfan, certainly in those days, as a mining area, family involved at all?
Yeah, my father was a coal miner. My brother left school and went to become a coal miner. Everybody in the village either worked in the mine or in Hoover's, the factory up the road.
And if the mines hadn't been closed down, do you think you would have gone into mining?
No.
Okay. Because?
Because who would? I mean, why would you want to? It was such a hard lifestyle. But no, I was always a bit different.
So you went to university?
I was very fortunate. At the time, this is 1979, very few people went to university, and I was very fortunate. I was thankful for a system called clearing, and I got myself to Aberystwyth.
That's really where they're desperate to get anybody, isn't it?
Yeah, they just needed to fill seats.
And what did you study at Aberystwyth?
I went to study law. I found it deathly boring, so I switched to economics.
Okay, and that wasn't boring.
I don't remember that much of it.
Okay, we won't get into too many details. Now, if I can go back then to 1966, you would just go to school on an ordinary sort of day, and had you heard anything about things? Things should be sorted out up there. But was there any that sort of conversation going on in your household?
Let me answer that in 2 ways. First of all, what we're going to go on and talk about is just my life. I had nothing to compare it with. It was where I was. It was how I grew up. It was the environment I was in. But secondly, the memories we're about to speak about are actually my first memories. I remember nothing before that day. I was 5 at the time. I'd started school in the September, and this happened in the October. And I have no memories before that. I don't know if it's usual to have memories before the age of 5, but I don't, so no, there was never any conversation there.
All right, so you go to school on an ordinary sort of day, and then tell us what you do remember, because as a 5-year-old, even that's difficult. But
yeah, and you know, I'd like to say that I've got this video that plays in my mind, and I could tell you everything that happened and the order of it. But the truth is, I've got some sounds and a few. Some of you won't understand black and white postcard images in my mind. Yeah, I explain it to the younger people afterwards. I've just got some snapshots in my mind. The first is the sound when it happened. So I was in the classroom, and I don't know why I would have thought this. You know, this was the 1960s. We'd barely seen an aeroplane other than a dot in the sky. But I remember thinking an aeroplane had crashed.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, you know, something had happened, and I remember thinking that. The next thing I remember is being led out of the classroom, and I was in a part of the school that was still standing, so we were able to walk out, and walked out of the classroom, and outside the door was the play yard, you know, a tarmac yard with a tin building, you know, like a Dutch barn then by the side of it, which may have explained the aeroplane thinking. I don't know, it was metal or something. So when I went into the school, that's what I came in from, was the yard. When I came out, it was gone. And it was replaced by just this mountain of rubble and black and stuff that wasn't there 15 minutes ago. So I remember seeing that. I remember crying because I had blood on my jumper. And it was a jumper that my mother knitted for me. You didn't want to trust my mother. But I remember crying. And then my next memory is being carried around the back of the house, around what we used to call the gullies, the lanes, around the back of the house, being carried there.
By?
I think it was my mother, but I can't remember.
No.
What I can remember is whoever it was wading through slurry this deep. Slurry being this very wet but viscous kind of mud full of coal dust. And I just remember being carried and wading through this blackness again, which wasn't there. So those are my memories. And then two afterwards, if I may, just to carry on. And the one is the sound of bells, because there was no sirens on police cars and ambulances and fire engines at the time. It was bells. Yeah. The sound of bells. And then for the next, goodness knows how many years, but for the next years, the sound of lorries. My mother's house was on the main road, on Aberfan Road. Still is, she still lives there today. And all of the tips that remained and all of the stuff that came down was all taken out of Aberfan by lorries. And every one of them went past our house. And as everyone went past, the front window rattled.
Oh, well. Yes.
That's a sound that doesn't leave you.
But Gareth, it's very young, but did you understand something absolutely dreadful had happened to some of your schoolmates?
At the time, it was just fear and upset. Everybody was acting so differently. I was taken, and a couple of other kids were taken straight down to my aunt's house, which was around the corner and kind of away from danger, because our house, if you went to Aberfan now, there's a bunch of what we still call the new houses. Yeah? And my mother's house is the first one of the originals still standing. We were actually at the bottom of the hill, below the school.
Right.
So it took out 2 or 3 streets, and then the first house standing was my mother's. So I just remember that everybody was upset, and that everything had changed. And we were then very fortunate. We were then bundled into a car very quickly and taken off to my grandfather's farm in mid-Wales.
Wow. Now, just for the very young ones, and there are some, what exactly happened?
So, coal mining was a very, very profitable industry in the South Wales valleys. It built the South Wales valleys, it built the Cardiff docks, it built Barry docks, it fueled the whole of this area economically. But when you dig coal up from underground, which is where it comes from, you then have to separate the coal from the rubbish that you dig up as well, which is no good. Yeah? So you've got the coal, which you then put on trains, and it came down to the docks, and you sold it. And then you got the rubbish. And they didn't know what to do with it. So they just took the rubbish up onto the hill above the village and they just started dumping it. And if you think of being on the beach and you put a bucket of sand, and then you tip another bucket of sand on top, and another bucket of sand on top, it starts to look like a pyramid, like a cone. And they kept doing that time and time again, tipping all this rubbish. And they tipped it into 7 separate cones on the mountainside. And they just kept tipping it there. And then one day, one of the cones started slipping. And it slid down the mountain. So that's what it was. It was the rubbish,
And
the leftover from coal mining.
It slid down the mountain onto your school.
It slid down the mountain and it went straight through the school and straight through 3 streets of houses. And it killed a lot of people.
And a lot of young children.
114 young children in that school died on that day. 114 out of a total register of 250 in the school. So it's pretty much half of the pupils in the school died on that day.
Blame game. Did people begin to blame?
I think there's 2 kinds of blame there. The one is, how did this happen? How did they get away with it? And the story still goes on today about the NCB, National Coal Board at the time, that they had a duty of care, which they didn't take seriously, and one thing and another. And there's no question, in today's environment, there's no question that it was wrong. But at the time, it was common practice. There are still many hundreds of tips in South Wales. So at the time, it was common practice. The other thing is not so much blame as guilt. There was an awful lot of guilt in the village, survivor guilt.
Well, indeed, you see, did your brother survive and your sister?
My sister was she'd already gone to grammar school in Quakers Yard, so she'd gone. She was safe. My brother was in the class, and where I say I was in a bit where I walked out, he was in one of the classes that was buried, and he was dug out. And fortunately, he's alive, and he's still alive now, and actually lives next door to now. But my brother was dug out. Whenever you see stories on Aberfan and interviews, it tends to be 3 or 4 different people. It's Geoffrey Edwards, David Davis, Gaynor Madrick. My brother was in their class. So he was one of those.
So your mother then had 3 children, all of whom survived for different reasons. I don't know, did she have survivor guilt? And did some who'd lost their children, were they, I don't know, angry towards, bitter towards your mother, envious? I don't know what the emotions are.
No, I think a lot of people died on that day, a lot of children died on that day. A lot of children then left the village when their parents just said, don't want to live here, don't want to be here, and just moved away. So the numbers kept reducing. But I'm not sure that I'm ever aware of any parents who lost children blaming others, but I'm certainly aware of parents who didn't lose children feeling bad about the fact that others did. And there are stories, I don't remember this happening, Roger, but there are stories of people who used to not let their children go out and play on the streets where others had died. And would tell them to be quiet when going past this house and so on. And it made for a very sad environment.
Yeah. When you go back and see your mum, do you talk about what happened?
I have had, in the 56 years? Yeah.
It is.
In the 56 years since the Aberfan disaster, I've had one conversation with one person about Aberfan who comes from Aberfan. So in 56 years, there's been one conversation.
Because what? It just brings back too many bad memories?
No, because people don't talk about it. Nobody in Aberfan talks about it. Nobody in my family spoke about it. I never spoke with my father about it. My mother, I still haven't to this day spoken with my brother about it.
Really?
It just wouldn't be entertained as a conversation. He would leave the room if I raised it. But just around the time of the 50th anniversary, my mother was staying with us down in Pembrokeshire for a holiday. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to. It's in the news, I'm going to ask. And I asked her, what was your experience on the day? And she looked shocked. It was, why are you talking about this? But I asked her. And I wished I hadn't.
Because
I'd only ever thought of it from the perspective of my experience. I'd never thought of it from the perspective of a mother. And that was what she came up with, was horrible.
Do you go to the graves?
I've still never been.
You've never been. You see, I have, but I
Yeah.
wasn't involved.
Yeah.
Why haven't you been?
I keep thinking I'll go, and I keep finding reasons not to.
Are you worried what impact you'll have on you?
I think it's more instinctive than that. I just don't go. Yeah.
Now, obviously, we're talking about things from a Christian point of view. As you went into your teens and 20s, did this memory, even if it was only a distant, vague one, did this endear you towards thinking, I need to get right with God? Or did it make you bitter against God, turn you against? What impact spiritually did this have on you?
I've been asked a number of times, was I angry with God? You know, did I shake my fist and say, how dare you, and things like that? And the answer is so simple. How could I be angry at God when he doesn't exist?
So you just didn't believe in him at all?
I had a faith. I was an atheist.
Right.
Yeah,
Was
I had a
that
belief
from your
system.
parents, or
No.
why do you think you...
No, it's... I've always been a kind of logical and structured thinker. And I had no guidance, I had no spiritual guide, if you like. I had no relationship with any pastor or vicar or anything of that nature. And the world made sense to me. The world made sense to me and didn't need a God.
So it's just bad luck that what happened in Aberfan happened?
Oh no, it was bad engineering.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it was bad engineering, simple as that.
Now, as an atheist, were you sort of committed atheist? Did you want to spread your atheism?
I was once described as an evangelical atheist. I would argue it. And honestly, I don't want to upset anybody, but I believed I could talk you fools out of this nonsense. I believed I could. I believed I could argue you out of it.
And you enjoyed arguing people out of it?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I never succeeded, but no, I enjoyed the arguments because I was right.
Okay, all right. And this continued, obviously, for a number of years.
For decades.
Okay, decades. How long have you been a Christian?
7 years.
All right, so many decades. Oh, sorry, a few decades. Anyway. And so what happened that began to challenge your own thinking, undermine your own thinking?
What happened? Well, let's leap forward in the story, and it comes to my now life, which gives you a correct implication of the rest of the story. But my wife, 8 years ago, had a health scare. She had a test, it suggested there may be cancer. She had another test, it confirmed it. They did another test, and she went back for the results of that test. And they'd actually booked an appointment with the surgeon that afternoon.
Right.
So it tells you what they were expecting the outcome
Yes.
to be.
Yeah.
And she went into the room and she described it to me, and it was, name, Vanessa Davis, okay, and date of birth, and your address, okay, and date of birth again.
Oh, no, they ask you the same thing over and over.
Any other
yes.
numbers that you may have. Right, let's have a look at these results then, and it's all clear. It's all clear. And there was no explanation to it. And the doctor looked, she said, like, was turning the page over and looking, it was just total confusion from the doctor. And she came home, my wife came home, and she said that she felt as if her hand had come on her shoulder and she'd been physically turned around. Now, she wasn't a Christian, but she believed that there was God.
Okay.
And I didn't understand the difference. I thought, that's kind of a halfway house, isn't it?
You hadn't convinced her, you hadn't tried to persuade her that there is no God there.
I tried many times.
Right.
She's a strong-willed woman. But she believed that she'd been healed. She
Right.
believed that her physical condition had been changed somehow. And she said, I'm going to start going to chapel. And I said, great, happy for you, atheist. Knock yourself out, atheist. And she found the chapel and she went. Which, terrific. She then came home, every Sunday she'd go on Sunday morning, and then she started going on Sunday afternoons, then she started going on Thursday evenings, and eventually I was like, okay. And she was coming home and talking about her friends that she'd talk about, Reenie and John and Chris and John and Phil and John. There's a lot of Johns in And she said one day, come to a service, come and meet them. So I thought, okay, I'll come, but atheist.
Right.
And I went and I heard my first ever sermon, and it was great. It was really, really good. And I went and I told Ian afterwards, the pastor who preached it, that was really great. All made up, but really great. And we had tea and cake afterwards, and that was that. And I went on 2 or 3 other occasions, and then one day in the summer, she said, "Oh, look, we've got a barbecue in chapel, and there's some Americans from Mississippi are over." I later found out they were missionaries come to Haverfordwest. You'll understand that intro. But I thought, oh, yeah, barbecue, what's not to like? So I went along, and the leader of the mission, Dennis, said, "Right, I'm going to say a few words now," and my thought was, "Oh, here's the payback, free burger."
No such thing as a free lunch, yes, okay.
And we know now, in this amazing book we've got, he could have told any of thousands of stories. But what he chose to do on that day was to tell the story of the Bible in about 30 minutes.
Okay.
From start to end. Try it one day. Try it, yeah? From start to end. And I mean, this is an amazing story. And it was a story that I'd never heard.
So you were an atheist, but you'd never read the Bible before?
No, why would I? Yeah, I read Lord of the Rings.
All right.
It had as much credence to me. So I'd never heard the story. And I listened to this story, and I went up to Dennis afterwards and said, "Wow, what a romp, what a story, what a yarn. I mean, all made up, but what a great story." And he said, "Well, if you liked it, come along tomorrow night. I'm doing a talk on how it was written." And I thought, here's some ammunition for me.
Right.
I'll go along. And he told the story of how it was written. And it's remarkable. If you think that I mentioned a moment ago that I'm this sort of structured thinker, he told me, or he told the group gathered, that this story was written by over 40 separate people who lived across any number of different countries and even continents, and they wrote it over the period of 1,500 years. And it's such an important book that ever since it was written, academics have tried to rubbish it and pick holes in it, and nobody has managed yet. And that unsettled me.
Right, okay.
Dramatically.
Had your wife, do you think, become a Christian? Had she been converted to Christ at this stage?
She was well down the road.
Right, okay.
She was well down the road. We were actually baptised together.
Okay.
So I caught up.
Okay. All right, so you've heard 2 talks, you've heard a few sermons.
Yeah.
What happened then?
What happened then was the hymn "To God Be the Glory." I went along to a service. It was around this time of year. I can't remember again the reason why I was there. Come along, whatever. And in the second verse of that amazing hymn, it says, "The vilest offender who truly believes, that moment from Jesus a pardon receives." Yeah, you know it? I couldn't sing those words. Now, we all love a sing-song. Atheists love to sing as well. But I couldn't sing those words because I was crying. And I wasn't a man given to crying. I cry now, I'm about to. But I wasn't a man who broke down in tears frequently. So I sort of choked it back and I think I got away with it, nobody noticed, and you sit back down again. And then the next hymn, and this did it for me, the next hymn, Amazing Grace. "'Twas grace that's brought me safe this far, and grace will see me home." That was it, I was finished. I might as well have thrown my hands up and said, okay.
So go on, what was it, Gareth, about those 2 verses from those 2 hymns that really convinced you about Christianity and broke down your atheism?
The relevance. We've touched on the beginning of my story. There's more to come. But I was a vile offender. There's been periods in my life where I've been a very unappealing person, but I was also offending because I was telling God he didn't exist. I mean, I was a vilest offender.
Okay,
Yeah.
you realised
But that pardon was for me if I wanted it. And then the second one is that I believed that I got to where I'd got because I was so great. For all the hills and the bumps that I went over in my life, I bounced back time and time and time again. And I did so because I was so great. I was just so fabulous that I could survive anything. And there it was. It's grace that's got me this far. And I looked back over my life over the ensuing weeks. Over the ensuing weeks, that moment, if you like, was a watershed. But I did not want to recognise the fact that I was a Christian. I fought against it.
Do you think
very
that
unwelcome.
moment was when you trusted Jesus, or did that come gradually later?
It was at that moment that I recognised I was losing the argument.
Okay.
Yeah? And that I was going to have to admit it. But I didn't admit it because I didn't want to lose the argument. So I went away and I started reading and watching things and studying. I read Before You Say You Don't Believe.
Oh, did you really? Oh,
Wonderful little book,
somebody's read it.
written by some guy called Carswell. I then read what I was disappointed with. I thought it was a cookbook. It was called Real Christian.
Oh, right. Okay.
But those books were actually, and I don't want to flatter, but those books were a big part in my journey, which makes it sound like X Factor, but it was a big part because it showed me that other people had gone through this process that I was currently in the midst of. And I didn't actually manage or need to get to the end. Because partway through, it had answered every question from the perspective that others too had done this, and therefore it's okay. So it was some maybe weeks after singing those hymns or failing to sing those hymns that I just said, okay, I'm a Christian, you got me.
It's a bit humbling to do that though, Gareth, because you really are saying I'm wrong, and I have been wrong, and all my arguing and pride, etc. is wrong.
Yeah. Do you know the story of Naaman? Naaman.
Yeah, so he was a captain of the Syrian guard who he'd got leprosy and he had to dip himself 7 times in a river, didn't he?
And he said, I'm not going to dip, our river is perfectly good, I'm not going to dip myself in that river. No way, who does he think he is? He didn't even come to the door to tell me. No, I'm not going to go and do that. Pride. But they persuaded him, go and dip yourself in the river as he was told, and he did, and he came out and was cleansed. Yeah, he humbled himself.
So had you understood the sort of central themes of Christianity, that Jesus died for your sin, that he was buried, that he rose from the dead? You'd got all this?
No. I'd heard it, but I was dismissing it as I was hearing it. But, you know, it's like I said to a friend, I had to go and tell all my friends, didn't I?
Okay.
You know, you've got to
your
tell
atheistic friends?
Yeah. And I remember going and seeing my mate Dave from Anisabul, up the way. And I went to see my mate Dave, who we rode bikes together for years. And I was there one day, and he said, "Are you doing anything interesting this weekend, Kevin?" "Yeah, I am, Dave, actually. I'm getting baptised." I said, "How did that happen? How come you stopped arguing as you were?" And I said, "Dave, it's difficult to argue against the existence of God when he taps you on the shoulder." And it felt like that. I believed in God, and I believed in the saving grace of Jesus before I really knew the story or had thought of it. Because it's the saving grace, not the saving degree or the saving A-level.
Grace is really God's love that we don't deserve, isn't it?
It's grace. You know, you study it afterwards. Just welcome the grace first.
So you're a believer.
Yes.
Why didn't God hold back that slag heap in Aberfan?
Who knows? You've got a book there on it. Lovely book. I'll read it one day. God's ways, God has a plan. You know, one plan for the whole of us, the whole of his creation, one plan. And we don't know what our part in it is, never mind the whole picture. And why this happened, I don't know. I only know that it happened because we brought evil into the world. We brought sin into the world. And this was an act of man, not an act of God. It was an act of engineering, which God could have stopped. Why he chose not to, I don't know. He could have stopped. But we don't know what those people are going to go on to become, and we don't know how many of them would have been saved, how many of them would have become Christians during their lives. But if they would have become Christians, then they were saved anyway.
What's the defining moment of your life, do you think? The Aberfan disaster or what happened 7 years ago?
Oh, what happened 7 years ago? I remember many years ago, a friend of mine, I used to surf with him for years, and he said, he came up to me and he said, "Gareth, I'm a born-again Christian." Right. Yeah, and I sort of went, "Oh." Yeah? And then we carried on. And I had no idea what it meant. I'm a born-again Christian, and now I know what that means. And it's not just defining of your life, it's defining of you. It's your core. You are reborn. And a couple of years ago, I popped in to see him on spec. I was driving past. I hadn't seen him for years, but I knew where he lived. And I stopped by, and we sat down, we started having a cup of tea and a chat, and he reached across the table and he said, welcome to the faith, brother.
Oh, did he? Yes.
He knew, yeah.
And your wife, did she become a Christian before? Who got there first?
She got there first. She got there first.
And you were baptised. Baptism didn't make you a Christian, but it was a sort of sign that, right, I'm dying to my old life, I'm living to the Lord Jesus, and I want everybody to know.
It's a public declaration of who I now am, and I wanted to make that public.
What would you say are the main differences between you before that and after?
To everything. How do you describe everything? I can barely remember how I lived, or even who I am, who I was. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you. Here's the word: joy. I never remember using the word joy before I became a Christian. Why would anybody use the word joy? Use happiness. Happiness is transient. It comes and it goes. I still have happiness, and I still have moments in my life. But I now experience joy. I am full of joy. And joy is lasting. Joy is enduring. Yeah? So I'm not one of these sort of inane, always smiling, the caricatures. But I am full of the joy of knowing that I'm saved by Jesus.
And the work you're doing with this charity for farmers, were you doing this before?
No.
So is it a consequence of you having become a Christian?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I had a very successful career and not wildly successful, but I retired at the age of 52. And that was it. I was living in a lovely house in Pembrokeshire, wife, dogs, bikes. That was it. I'm happy. And then a couple of years later, my wife came home with the Farmers Weekly, which nobody picks that up. But she'd picked it up and she'd read it. Yeah, it's like a free newspaper down there. And she'd read it. She said, oh, there's a little job there that you'd be really good at. I said, come on, I'm retired. And I read the ad, and it just grabbed me there and just wrung my heart out. And I applied for the job. And she still doesn't understand to this day why I would have applied for it. But it had 3 essentials. Yeah, I remember when you apply for jobs, it had 3 essentials. Welsh speaking, farming background, and experience of working in the not-for-profit sector. 0 out of 3, so I got the job.
I think we call that scraping the barrel. Were you the only applicant?
No, my wife applied as well. But I beat her. 1-1.
1-1. Gareth, great to hear your story. We're going to have a break now
Sure.
for 10, 12 minutes. We've got some hot cross buns and some coffee, etc. And people can come and chat with you, can't
Oh, please do, yeah.
And then we'll look at together to draw things to a conclusion into the Bible. But Gareth, thank you so much. Fascinating. Listen, shall we show our Thank you very much. That's great. Thanks, Gareth. So do go through hot cross buns, etc. It's Easter. Enjoy and do chat together. We'll gather again in about 10 minutes or so.